Miter saws are pretty essential tools these days, whether you're in a garage workshop or you're mobile on a job site. We can make a much longer video full of miter saw tips and tricks, and I plan on doing that sometime. But today I just want to give you 4 tips that I think will really make a difference for you the next time you cut something with your miter saw. Listen to all 4 carefully, then tell me in the comments below if you agree that these should be in the manual of every miter saw sold. Let's start with one of the most clever tips I have ever learned about this tool. If you're making multiple cuts of the same length, it's very common to attach some sort of stop to the fence or outfeed table that you can use as a reference, so every piece will be of the exact same length without measuring and marking them individually. But what's the most accurate way to position that stop in the first place? Usually you measure from the outside of one of the teeth on your saw blade. But the old timers had a better way. This is an old radial arm saw trick that can be applied to the more modern miter saw. Clamp down a scrap of wood and make a shallow cut into the top that doesn't go all the way through. Now you know exactly where the saw kerf will fall, and you can hook the end of your tape in that kerf to measure and position your stop. It's simple, fast, and accurate. The second tip concerns something I see done all the time with sliding miter saws. You probably do it too, and you may not even know how wrong this is. A sliding miter saw is not intended to be lowered down into the cut and then pulled toward you through the wood. That's called a climb cut because the teeth are rotating down onto the wood from above, and like a wheel, the blade will want to climb on top of the workpiece, and it could potentially lurch toward your body and any fingers carelessly placed. The proper way to use a sliding miter saw is to pull it forward above the workpiece, then lower it down into the wood so you can make your cut in a pushing motion away from you. That way the teeth will be pulling the blade downward into the cut instead of pushing it up out of the cut. Now when I teach this, I sometimes hear a couple objections. First, some folks claim that cutting with the back of the blade in this way may pull the blade down, but it may also lift the workpiece upward. Well, my response is the weight of the workpiece working in your favor makes it much easier to counter any slight upward lifting force upon the wood than it would be to resist the potential dual force of a rising blade and a forward lurching carriage, especially if you were to hit a knot or something causes the blade to bind mid-cut. Others point out that the upward motion of those cutting teeth may produce chip out on the top of the workpiece, and that's a problem when you can't put the good side of the board facing down, such as when you're cutting trim and moldings. My response to that is that almost all trim and moldings are narrow enough that they're cut with a single downward motion. There's no pulling the carriage forward at all, so this technique doesn't apply to trim. With wider boards, frankly, the best way to get the cleanest cut is to just use a sharp and proper blade. I changed all my saw blades in my shop to Ridge Carbide several years ago. I have never looked back. It makes a huge difference, especially for crosscuts. My third tip concerns a dangerous practice I've seen online and even experienced myself years ago. It occurs when you're cutting a board that isn't flat or straight with a miter saw. Now this can result in the blade binding in the wood and even violently kicking the carriage back. This is a situation you definitely want to avoid. So your best option when working with boards that are not straight and flat, such as rough sawn lumber, is to cut them with a handheld circular saw while one end is hanging off the edge of your bench or sawhorse. That way its weight will open the kerf as it falls away. A jigsaw would be even better, but it's slower. Another option is called kerfing. Now kerfing is commonly used when you're cutting thick materials where internal stress in the wood could cause it to bind even if the board is straight. But this technique can also be used for rough sawn boards that have a slight bow or twist to them. The idea is to score the top surface of the wood with a light cut, and then follow by another that goes a little deeper and so on, cutting through the piece in multiple passes. If the kerf tries to close during any one pass, there won't be enough of the blade buried in the wood to cause that violent kickback reaction. And then the next pass will reopen any closing kerf. This technique can all but eliminate dangerous binding incidents. Tip number 4 is one that I have shared before because I think it is the single most important miter saw tip you're ever going to hear. Seriously, this may save your fingers someday. Perhaps one of the biggest causes of injuries when using a miter saw occurs when you're cutting small workpieces, especially if that cutout doesn't entirely span the gap in the fence behind the workpiece. If the blade catches, it can pull that piece as well as the hand holding it into the blade in the blink of an eye. So if you must cut small pieces with a miter saw, and you probably should avoid it as much as possible, but if you must do it, get one of these. It's a specially designed holding stick that keeps small pieces firmly against both the table and the fence. The grippy knobs on the bottom couple with the forked end to make it very stable and fast to use. You can use it in both directions. Sometimes I put the forked end on the workpiece, and other times I use the other end, whichever is most comfortable. This has saved one person in my shop already. I really believe this is perhaps the most important safety device I've ever seen for a miter saw. I'm going to link to it below. Get yourself one before they're gone, because they tend to sell out whenever I mention it. If they are sold out, make a note to check back later. It's that important. In the meantime, check this out. Ridge Carbide is the best kept secret in woodworking. I kid you not, their saw blades are second to none, both in quality and performance, and they're less expensive than the other ultra premium brands. Do yourself a favor, use the link and the discount code below this video. You will never go back to cheap blades again.